Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I stood on wet grass at 6 a.m., watching the excavation team carefully erect barriers around Jeffrey Pritchard's grave. Fog clung thick to the granite headstones, turning Street Catherine's cemetery into a painting with no clear edges. In 17 years as Bristol's medical examiner, I'd ordered 9 exhumations. This was number 10. You don't dig up graves on a whim. You dig when something doesn't fit in the records. When test results from Edinburgh come back late, but carrying undeniable numbers. When a healthy 62-year-old businessman dies suddenly in his sleep and leaves an £8 million estate to 3 people who never attended his funeral. Jeffrey Pritchard had been underground for 4.5 months. I'd signed his death certificate myself. Acute congestive heart failure, clear presentation. Nothing suspicious. But 10 days ago, the toxicology lab sent a supplementary report on his final blood sample. They'd found traces of a compound that doesn't occur naturally in the human body. A compound that could cause exactly the symptoms Pritchard experienced before death. So here we were. Walter Grimsby, the groundskeeper, stood about 15 feet away, hands buried deep in his thick wool coat pockets, watching the excavation team with the face of someone who knew what was coming and wanted no part of witnessing it. Walter had tended this place for 36 years. He had that particular bearing you only get from living too long beside death, a strange calm. Not numb but not haunted either. He'd called me 3 nights ago, which was unusual. Walter never called unless absolutely necessary. Said he needed to tell me something before the excavation began. His voice was quiet but insistent. The voice of someone trying to stay calm while discussing something completely unreasonable. "I've been hearing knocking," he said, "from Pritchard's plot. Started about 3 weeks after the burial. Only at night. Only when the wind's still. I've checked the drainage pipes. Checked the old oak roots, even checked for badgers. Found nothing that explains it." I thanked him and made a note. Didn't think much of it because groundskeepers often hear things. Old cemeteries have settled in earth, tree roots invading concrete structures. There's always a scientific explanation for most things, and the things that can't be explained usually aren't worth losing sleep over. The excavation leader, a Welshman named Gareth, who'd worked archaeological projects across southern England, worked slowly and meticulously, removing each layer of earth with strict protocol. Chief Inspector Duncan Mackley had stood near my Land Rover, looking like a man who wanted to be anywhere else. Duncan was 42, pragmatic to the point of rigidity, the kind of person who only believed in physical evidence, but could fit in a sealed evidence bag. He'd been blunt when I requested police presence. This was a waste of resources. Pritchard died of heart failure. And even if someone contributed to that heart failure, a 4.5-month-old corpse had nothing left to exploit. By 8 a.m., they'd exposed the protective granite layer. The outer concrete removed. When Gareth and his 2 assistants carefully lifted the oak casket and set it beside the grave, I knew something was wrong. Not wrong in a way I could explain with words, but the kind where instinct screams before reason catches up. The casket was high-grade oak with a glossy finish and sealed system. We had to break the seal to open it, meaning detailed photographs. Documenting every step, maintaining chain of custody. Dr. Edward Chen arrived as I was conducting preliminary external examination of the casket. Driving his black Volvo and stepping out with his specialized equipment case and the expression he always wore when a case was about to become complicated in the worst possible way. Edward was the forensic pathologist I'd partnered with on 12 difficult cases. Brilliant, meticulous, unflinching in what needed to be done. The kind of doctor who could dissect a human body and still calmly discuss weekend plans. "Morning, Helena," he said, setting down his case. "What are we looking for?" "Traces of unusual chemicals," I answered. "Suspected poisoning. I need tissue samples: liver, kidneys, hair, fingernails if they're preserved. Comprehensive examination." He nodded, knelt beside the casket, ran his gloved hand along the seal line. Outer protective layer still intact. Waterproof, no signs of tampering. We broke the seal and the smell emerged immediately. Not the heavy decomposition we expected, but something else. The sweet scent of preservation chemicals. The formaldehyde had done its job well, but there was another smell. Faint and off, like metal mixed with damp, moldy leather. Edward and I looked at each other. He smelled the anomaly too. We opened the lid slowly, then both froze. Jeffrey Pritchard was no longer in the position we'd arranged him. At the burial, his hands had been placed neatly at his sides. A traditional posture British funerals always use. But now his hands were clasped over his stomach. Right hand placed over left, a position I'd seen at countless other funerals, but absolutely, completely certain hadn't been present here 4.5 months ago. I had photographic records. I had documentation. I had testimony from 5 funeral attendees, none of whom remembered seeing hands clasped like that. "Helena," Edward said softly. His voice had changed. "Look at his hands more closely." I looked. Pritchard's fingers were slightly curved, not straightened, and beneath the nails. I leaned in close, using my LED light were dark fragments. Fabric pieces. The casket's interior lining was cream silk. These fragments were ochre, ragged, pressed tight under the nails as if he'd clawed at something. Duncan stepped closer, looking over my shoulder. "Bodies can shift," he said. "Biochemical gases accumulate, decomposition process. Things can change position." "Not like this," Edward said. He was shining light on Pritchard's face, his hand trembling slightly rare because Edward's hands never shook. "Look at his expression." Pritchard's mouth was slightly open, not wide, but enough to see his tongue pressed against his teeth. Eyes squeezed shut, but the skin around the sockets swollen, pulled back as if straining. It was the expression of a man trying very, very desperately to do something urgent. We spent 5 hours on preliminary documentation, photographing every angle, measuring, taking samples. Edward carefully scraped samples from beneath each fingernail. We transported the body to Bristol Mortuary at 3 p.m., and I had Duncan retrieve all cemeteries' security camera footage from the past 4.5 months. While waiting, I had a 4 o'clock appointment. Beatrice Pritchard, the deceased's daughter, who'd called my office 3 times weekly since the funeral, asking questions I had no answers for. She appeared right on time, 35 years old, carrying a brown A4 envelope clutched like it might explode any moment. We sat in my office. She placed the envelope on the desk but didn't open it. "I've been receiving letters," she said. Voice steady but hands weren't. "Started 4 weeks ago. No return address. Bristol postmark." They describe. She stopped, swallowed hard. "Describe what it feels like inside the casket." "Absolute darkness, air depleting by the second, the knocking." "Describe my father's final minutes in perfect detail. Like the sensation of silk touching face skin, the sound of knuckles rapping on wood, the exact moment he realized no one was coming. I felt cold spread from my stomach. "May I see them?" She opened the envelope. 4 letters, computer printed. Unsigned. I read slowly, and with each line, the cold spread. Specific details, vivid, medically accurate enough to raise goosebumps on my skin. Descriptions of hypoxia, carbon dioxide buildup, panic and physical pain slowly intensifying. The writer knew exactly what they were describing. Who else knows about these letters? I asked. No one. I thought I was hallucinating. I thought I was going insane. She looked at me, eyes red-rimmed. But you found something, didn't you? That's why you were there this morning. That's why you dug up my father. I couldn't tell her everything, but I told her enough. About the position change. About the fabric fragments. I watched her face pale. He was alive. She whispered. When they buried him, he was still alive. No, I said firmly. I examined him myself. He was dead. Brain ceased function. Heart stopped beating. All clinical signs fully present. There's no medical possibility that happened. Then explain this. Her voice broke. Why did he move? Why did someone know what it felt like? I had no answer. And 5 days later, when Edward called at 2 a.m. with re-examination results, I still had no answer because tissue samples showed cortisol and adrenaline levels spiking dramatically, consistent with extreme physical exertion and ultimate panic. Produced after formaldehyde preservative was pumped in. Produced after the heart had stopped beating, which by all scientific standards was completely impossible. We re-excavated the casket, this time just to examine the interior. Walter came along and stood at the grave's edge looking down with an expression I couldn't read. We photographed the lining inside the casket lid. And there they were, fresh scratches, thin and desperate, concentrated in an area about 6 inches from where Pritchard's head had been. Fresh scratches disturbing the dust that had settled for 4.5 months. Duncan tried to explain. Mice, he said. Beetles. Something got into the protective layer after we opened it the first time, but we documented the layer's integrity. We photographed the seal. Nothing could have gotten in. That night, Walter called again. The knocking, he said. It's not at Pritchard's grave anymore. Where is it? I asked, though some part of me already knew the answer. It's moving, he said. Started at Pritchard, moved to Mrs. Ellsworth's grave 2 nights ago, then Mr. Ashford's grave last night. It's moving through the cemetery. 1 grave at a time, heading toward the main gate. Walter, that's not possible. I know what I hear. His voice was hard. And I know which direction it's going. It's following the old path. The funeral procession route from the 1922. The path that leads straight to Clevedon Road. Clevedon Road runs through the cemetery, winds through town, and ends right before the old stone house I'd lived in for 22 years. Last night at 2 a.m., I woke to a sound I didn't immediately recognize. Steady. Faint, coming from somewhere below my bedroom. I lay in darkness listening, trying to give it a reasonable source. Tree branches, old pipes, settling floors. But I knew. Even before walking downstairs with my flashlight, even before standing in the cold stone basement listening to patient, desperate knocking coming from somewhere deep beneath the granite foundation, I knew that some dead refused to stay silent. Even when every principle of science says they must be silent. Even when their story is unreasonable, violating every law of biology and reason. Even when they've been dead for 4.5 months. The knocking continues. And each night it grows a little clearer. I'm writing this because someone needs to know what I witnessed, even if they never believe me. My name is Marcus Webb. I've been a forensic examiner in Edinburgh for 14 years. And 4 weeks ago I lost control of my eyes. It started with Catherine Morrison's exhumation on a Wednesday morning in early October. The air was bitter cold, carrying the smell of rotting leaves, And I remember thinking how fitting digging up a mountaineering accident victim who'd been underground for 20 months in weather that matched the inside of her grave. The Morrison family requested the exhumation to move the body to their family cemetery in the Highlands. Standard procedure, nothing special. Catherine died climbing Ben Nevis alone. Her body was found after 5 days. Funeral held with a closed casket due to the condition. I wasn't involved in the initial case. That was my predecessor, Dr. Macpherson, now retired on the Isle of Skye 8 months ago. But I'd studied the file death by head trauma. Mountaineering accident, no criminal suspicion, toxicology clean. The kind of death that's tragic but uncomplicated. Cemetery workers opened the vault at 7 a.m. And my forensic assistant, Owen Campbell, had the documentation station ready when I arrived. Owen was talented, methodical, unshakable. The kind of person who could drink coffee while documenting a horrific accident scene. He'd worked with me for years. I'd never seen him rattled. But that morning when we opened the casket, I saw his face go blank in a way that made my gut clench. Catherine Morrison looked like she'd been buried yesterday, not 20 months ago. Her skin was still smooth and taut like a body dead 8 hours. Hair glossy, cascading over her shoulders like she was napping. Hands folded on her chest showed no decay, no skin slippage, no discoloration. And her eyes. God. Her eyes were wide open, bright and alert, staring straight up like she was observing something magnificent only she could see. I've witnessed thousands of dead faces. They're never like this. They're hollow, collapsed. This was different. This isn't possible, Owen whispered. He held the camera but hadn't pressed the shutter. Marcus, this can't be happening. I checked the casket seal myself. Still intact. No signs of reopening, no tool marks. Nothing. The airtight seal had held for 20 months. I reviewed the funeral paperwork. No embalming chemicals used. Catherine's family requested natural burial, basic cleaning and biodegradable organic lining only. In 20 months, even under the best conditions, there should be significant decomposition. In a sealed casket in Scottish clay. She should have been long gone. We transported the body to the mortuary. I spent 7 hours running every test I could think of. Tissue samples, histological analysis, biochemical composition. Everything. All unassisted. I noticed he wore 3 layers of gloves, not standard protocol. When I asked, he just shook his head. Something's wrong, he said. I can feel it through the skin, even through gloves, like a vibration but cold. I felt nothing, but I trusted Owen's instincts. Preliminary results came back at 6 p.m. I had to run them for times because they were nonsensical. Catherine's cellular structure had petrified, not preserved, but transformed into something I'd never encountered in medical literature. Cells still intact, but rigid, fixed in a state that defied every law of biological decomposition I knew. Like looking at a living fossil. That evening, I called Alistair Morrison, the widower, to inform him of the transport delay. We need additional testing before releasing the body for movement. He was silent for a long time after I explained, then asked if I'd noticed anything unusual about Catherine's appearance. Why do you ask? I said. More silence. Then Catherine changed in her final 8 months. Obsessed with something she wouldn't discuss. She started visiting someone in the Cairgnors every Friday. Came home smelling of pine and resin. When I asked, she said she'd found a way to preserve beauty, make it immortal. I thought it was nature therapy or something. But after she died, I found a journal. Dozens of pages about immortality legends, ancient embalming techniques, rituals. I'd burned them because I was scared. I thought if I didn't acknowledge it, it was just a psychological phase, a private secret that died with her. He gave me rough directions to where Catherine used to go. An old stone cottage 12 miles into the Cardnorse pine forest, accessible from the A9. I said I'd look into it, but honestly, I was thinking about folklore, alternative medicine, grief psychology. Not reality. People face death in strange ways. Sometimes they need to believe in miracles because the alternative is too cruel. I reached the cottage the next morning. Took 3 hours of fumbling around. And when I found it, I understood why someone might believe in the impossible. The cottage was half collapsed, windows cracked, door hanging crooked off its hinges like a dislocated jaw. But inside, on shelves still standing despite the rot, were dozens of glass bottles, vintage pharmaceutical bottles. Each contained a body part. Eyes, tongues, ears, things I couldn't immediately identify. And every bottle showed that expression, the wide-open eyes. Tissue-shaped, molded into a posture of wakefulness and horrified wonder. I should have left immediately. But I'm a scientist and scientists investigate. I photographed everything. Took samples from 4 bottles, packaged according to protocol. There was a logbook, water damaged but partially readable. Names and dates from 40 years ago. Catherine Morrison's name appeared 17 times in her final 8 months. The last entry was 3 days before her fatal climbing accident. That night, I dreamed of her. Not a vague anxiety dream. I dreamed clearly that I stood in the cold room in Catherine's, at a pright in drawer number 9, eyes wide, gaze never closing. She looked at me and spoke in a voice like wind through stone crevices. "Some beauty lasts forever," she said. "But the price is paid in seeing, Marcus. Seeing things that shouldn't be seen." I woke at 4 a.m. The bedroom was pitch black, and I realized my eyes wouldn't blink, didn't want to blink. Didn't choose to blink. My eyes automatically widened, staring into darkness, and I couldn't close them. I stood before the bathroom mirror for 25 minutes trying to shut my eyes. But the eyelid muscles wouldn't respond. My eyes just stayed there wide open and alert. The next morning, symptoms eased. I told myself it was muscle spasm from sleep, stress, something explainable. But when I got to the mortuary, Owen wasn't there. His girlfriend called around 10 asking if I'd seen him. He left the apartment for work as usual but never showed up. His car was in the parking lot. Keys still in the ignition, but Owen had vanished. That afternoon I found his personnel file on the work desk. Someone had added a Polaroid photo to the folder. Picture of Owen in the mortuary standing beside drawer number 9. And he was staring, eyes wide open like that. I called Professor Eilide MacDougall, a retired botanist who'd consulted for me 3 years earlier. She lived 50 minutes drive away. When I described the cottage, she went silent for a long time. There was an herbal healer in those woods back in the 60s and 70s, she finally said. Woman named Agnes Kerr. She claimed to have discovered a preservation formula from native plants and something else. She called it the Covenant of Eyes. The body had to agree to be preserved, had to desire it deeply enough to accept the transformation. People thought she was insane until customers appeared with tissue that didn't age, eyes that didn't dim. Then people started disappearing. Those who wanted too much. I assume they were the ones who wouldn't accept that preservation has limits. Where is she now? No one knows. The cottage was abandoned in 1981. Some say she preserved herself. Some say customers came back for revenge. Either way, she left her work behind. That was 6 days ago. Since then, I've been researching. Journalist Fiona Stewart published a piece 5 years ago about disappearances in this area dating to the 70s. 9 people, all connected to alternative medicine. All vanished near Cardnorse Forest. Catherine Morrison wasn't on the list because her death was classified as accidental. When I pulled autopsy photos of a 1981 victim, and her eyes had the exact same petrified structure as Catherine's. Owen came back yesterday. Walked into the mortuary at 7 a.m. like nothing happened. Couldn't explain where he'd been. Said he just forgot for days. But he was different. Quieter, more distant. And when he thought I wasn't watching, he'd stare. Too long enough for me to see it wasn't his choice. Alistair Morrison died last night. Stroke. Discovered by his brother at home. Natural causes, they said. But I saw his face in the emergency ward before they took him away. And I recognized that expression. I'm writing this in my office at 3 a.m. because I feel it starting again. My eyes want to open wide. My cells want to petrify. Whatever Catherine brought back from those Friday trips, whatever she introduced into her body to create immortal beauty, it's not contained in bodies anymore. In the mortuary air and the tissue samples sitting in my lab freezer. If you work with the dead, there's one important rule. The dead don't want anything anymore. They've moved past the stage of craving. But sometimes the last thing they crave before death, the thing they desired enough to pay any price. Accept any bargain, that craving doesn't die with them. It waits. It petrifies. It spreads. Don't touch tissue that won't decompose. Don't trust preservation that shouldn't exist. And if you wake up with your eyes wide open, truly open, the kind of open you can't control, look at your hands. Look carefully. Because when your cells start to petrify, when your body begins transforming into something eternal, beautiful, and completely motionless, you'll want to know how much time you have left to finish writing this. I can't close my eyes anymore. It's been 9 hours now. My eyes are starting to burn. But it's a distant pain, like it's happening to someone else's eyes. I keep thinking about Catherine's words in the dream about the price paid and seen. About things that shouldn't be seen. I'm seeing them now, but I think it's too late. I've been Dublin's forensic examiner for 9 years, preceded by 10 years on the bench as a judge, so I understand what evidence needs to be. I know how chain of custody works, how records protect truth, how audio recordings can't lie. That's why what happened 4 weeks ago has me sitting here staring at a recorder, playing back the same 53 seconds, searching for a rational explanation that doesn't exist. It was a Tuesday morning, September 15th, when we received the court order to exhume Patrick O'Brien. He'd been dead 7 years, buried in Glassnant Cemetery beneath a plain sandstone marker bearing only his name and 2 dates. No memorial inscription, no sentiment. The kind of headstone you erect when you want people to forget. O'Brien died in Mountjoy Prison, convicted of murdering his business partner William Brennan in what prosecutors called a calculated crime of greed. The case rested entirely on circumstantial but compelling evidence. Clear financial motive, convenient opportunity, O'Brien's fingerprints on the knife. He proclaimed his innocence until his last breath when a heart attack took him in his cell. And his sister, Siobhan McCarthy, had been fighting ever since to clear his name. New evidence had emerged. A witness recanting testimony enough for a judge to order exhumation, seeking forensic anomalies in the original autopsy report. I arrived at the cemetery in the morning. Dublin's characteristic grey sky made everything look flat. My team was already there, to cemetery workers, my examination assistant Liam, and Inspector Fiona Murphy, who'd investigated Brennan's murder and always carried doubts about the verdict. Fiona was now past 55, bearing the quiet regret of a cop who thinks she might have helped convict an innocent man. Siobhan McCarthy stood near the grave, 70 years old, wearing a coat too heavy for the weather, watching us with an expression I recognized from my time on the bench, the look of someone told they were wrong for years who might finally be proven right. I always record exhumations, standard procedure, times, observations, anything unusual. I wore my compact Sony digital recorder device I'd used through hundreds of cases, tested and trusted. I started recording. Noted location, case number, personnel present, weather conditions. We began excavation. The vault was raised intact, waterproof. No structural damage. The casket was standard steel, sealed but showing rust and water stains from 7 years. We photographed from every angle, documented the seal, then used a pry bar to break it open. At 8:18. The smell hit, that familiar mix of decomposition and formaldehyde you never get used to, just learn to breathe through. I leaned in with my LED flashlight, examining what remained of Patrick O'Brien, and began recording my observations. Body consistent with 7-year burial period. Standard decomposition. Clothing intact, no obvious signs of. That's when it happened. Except it didn't happen. Not in any way I perceived in real time. I continued the examination. Liam took photographs. Fiona took notes. We worked for 45 minutes, professional and methodical. No one heard anything strange. Just my voice on the recorder. Liam's camera clicks, wind whistling through cemetery trees. We transported the body to the morgue. I didn't listen to the recording until that afternoon. While writing the preliminary report, I sat in my office, headphones on, transcribing notes, when I heard it. Right after I said no obvious signs of, right before continuing, there was another voicemail. Barely audible, carrying a quality that wasn't quite emotional, but wasn't quite mechanical either. It said two words: finally. Finally. I stopped playback, rewound, listened again. Those 2 words were still there, clear, distinct, layered beneath my voice, but completely separate. I checked the timestamp, exactly 1 minute after opening the casket. I called Liam into my office. Did you hear anything strange at the grave this morning? Voices? Sounds you couldn't identify the source of? He looked at me blankly. No. I played him the recording segment. He listened and I watched his face change. That's impossible. No one else was there. And we didn't hear anything. I know. Equipment malfunction. Signal interference. Possibly. But I'd used this recorder for 4 years without issues. And we were in a cemetery, not near broadcast towers or high voltage lines. That evening I called Connor Byrne. Connor was a forensic audio analyst I'd partnered with on 3 cases, 36-year-old genius. Best sound wave analyst I knew. I sent him the file and requested analysis. Gave no context, just wanted to know if the voice was real or fake. He called back after 7 hours. Voice changed. Sarah, where did you record this? An exhumation. Why? Because the voice you're asking about, the one saying, finally, isn't interference. Not radio signal or equipment error. It's an actual acoustic event captured by the microphone. But what doesn't make sense is the acoustic signature indicates the source came from an enclosed space, like speaking from inside a box. And the timestamp shows it occurred after opening the casket, but before anyone spoke. So either someone was hidden in a sealed casket for 7 years or what? Long silence. Or your equipment recorded something that couldn't be heard by human ears in real time. That doesn't happen. Sound doesn't work that way. I spent 3 days reviewing O'Brien's case file, searching for something that might explain. Fiona came to the morgue Saturday morning with the original evidence box, and we went through everything together. Crime scene photos, witness statements, the initial autopsy report from my predecessor, Dr. Hugh Donovan, retired 5 years ago in County Cork. Standard examination, nothing suspicious. William Brennan's cause of death, penetrating trauma from kitchen knife from O'Brien's office. I always felt something was wrong, Fiona said, pointing to testimony from Eve O'Brien, Patrick's wife. She'd testified Patrick was home with her the night Brennan was killed, but recanted at trial. Said she'd mixed up the dates. The prosecutor tore her apart. She killed herself 3 years later. I called Maev's death record. Suicide, concluded by Drive. Donovan, my predecessor. No suspicion. That afternoon I returned to Glasnez Cemetery alone. Not sure why. Maybe to check if the environment could cause anomalous recording phenomena. Maybe just needed to stand where I'd heard that voice. I brought the recorder, switched it on, stood beside the open grave. Cemetery deserted. September light week. I said nothing, let it run for 6 minutes. Turned it off and walked back to my car. I didn't listen until I got home. Almost deleted it. Figured there'd just be wind and silence. But something compelled me to put on headphones and play it back. And at 3 minutes 32 seconds, I heard them to voices this time. Arguing, words unclear but emotion unmistakable. Male and female, angry. Desperate and intimate in a way that raised goosebumps down my scalp. I isolated the segment, amplified it, ran it through audio analysis software I barely knew how to use. The male voice broke into fragments promised and couldn't keep. The female voice clearer they need to know. Patrick. They have to know what you did. I sat in my living room for 4 hours listening to those voices. And thought about evidence. About what would hold up in court and what would be dismissed. About the difference between truth and proof. Shalbon McCarthy called Monday morning. Have you found anything? She asked. And there was such hope in her voice I couldn't tell her what I'd actually found. So I said we were still processing, still analyzing. Would report when we had results. Then I called Fiona. I need another exhumation order, I said. Maeve O'Brien. Silence. On what grounds? On the grounds that I think she has something to tell us. We exhumed Maeve Thursday morning. Same cemetery. Different section. Her grave beneath an estuary. Headstone simpler than Patrick's. Just beloved carved beneath the name. Shalbon came again, stood in the same position. Watching with the same expression. I started recording, documenting every detail, trying to keep my voice steady. We opened the casket. Maeve O'Brien had been dead for years, and what remained looked exactly like for years. Nothing unusual. Nothing impossible, but my recorder was acting strange. LED flickering. Timestamp jumping numbers. Battery draining though I charged it full this morning. I documented what I could, but mid-observation, the recorder died completely. Dead despite showing 65% battery 3 minutes before. I didn't think much of it until I got to the morgue and plugged it into charge. The moment it powered on, it played. Not from the beginning of the recording, but from the middle of a segment. A segment I hadn't recorded. A segment that shouldn't exist. 2 voices clear and close, like standing right beside the microphone. Male voice. I didn't kill William. Donovan killed him. Donovan killed and framed me because William knew about the other examinations. The ones Donovan falsified for insurance fraud. Female voice breaking, desperate I couldn't testify. He threatened our daughter. He said if I told the truth for you, she'd have an accident. So I lied at trial, you went to prison. And I couldn't live with it. I couldn't live with what I did. Male voice again, softer. I know. I forgive you. But Sarah needs to know. She needs to find the records. Storage Unit 23rd, William's name. Donovan kept the key. Tell her. Then silence. Just dead air for 35 seconds before my voice returned. Documenting Maeve's body like nothing had happened. I listened to that recording 70 times. I had Connor analyze it and he couldn't explain. Voice is real. Captured by the device but shouldn't exist. Timestamp showed it was recorded 3 hours before I arrived at the cemetery. Impossible. Acoustic signature showed it was recorded in my morgue. Not at the grave. Absurd. Fiona obtained a warrant to search Storage Unit 23 yesterday. Rented under William Brennan's name, auto-paid from an account linked to Drive. Hugh Donovan. We haven't opened it yet. We will tomorrow morning. But I know what we'll find. Evidence of fraud, falsified reports, maybe proof of murder. I should feel vindicated. Should feel justice finally working. But instead I keep thinking about those voices, about how they knew my name, about how the dead tried harder to tell me the truth than the living ever did. My predecessor, Dr. Donovan, died last week. Stroke in his County Cork apartment, discovered by neighbors. Natural causes, they said. And maybe it was, maybe just coincidence. But I pulled his death certificate this morning and noticed something. Time of death confirmed by local examiner. The exact moment we opened Miev's casket. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in voices from the beyond. I believe in evidence. Documentation, recordings that can be tested and verified. But I also believe sometimes the dead speak louder than the living. And sometimes truth waits 7 years to find the right person to listen. The storage unit opens tomorrow morning. Shalban will finally have her evidence. Patrick and Miev will be vindicated. And I'll have an audio recording no court would accept. Though it's probably the most honest testimony I've ever heard. If you work with the dead, here's what I've learned: documentation is everything. But not every truth appears in official reports. Some confessions wait for the right witness. And some voices cross boundaries we think separate the living from the dead. Tonight I'll delete that recording. Not because it isn't real, but because it's too real. And no one would believe it anyway. The evidence in the storage unit will tell the story the justice system needs. But I'll know the truth was told to me first by 2 people who couldn't rest until someone finally listened. My recorder is sitting on my desk right now, powered off, battery removed. But sometimes in the office silence, I swear I still hear them. Right at the edge of perception, waiting to see if I'll keep my promise. I will. Tomorrow we open the unit. Tomorrow we find the evidence. Tomorrow justice might catch up to truth. But tonight, in the morgue silence, I listen one more time. To my name called by voices that shouldn't exist. Because if the dead can tell me what the living won't, then maybe I need to start asking better questions.